The Xtalks Life Science Podcast is your source for all things pharma, biotech, medtech, healthcare, research, and more.
Hello and welcome to the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. I am Soumya Shashikumar, Senior Life Sciences Journalist at Xtalks.com, and today we'll be talking about gout, a common form of inflammatory arthritis that develops when uric acid crystals build up in the joints. Joining us is James Mackay, CEO of Crystalys Therapeutics, a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company conducting research in gout. We'll discuss what happens in the body during gout, why the condition can be difficult to manage over time, what researchers are learning from studies involving different groups of patients. James, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
No, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I appreciate it.
So to start, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what drew you to working in gout, a condition that many people may not realize is still an active area of research?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm a scientist by training, did a degree in genetics, PhD in medical genetics, then joined industry. So I joined AstraZeneca, and that was the start of a 30-year career there. And towards the end of that career, I led a business development team that acquired a company called Ardea Biosciences, who were developing treatments for gout. So AstraZeneca acquired that company. And after acquiring the company, the AstraZeneca board asked me to go to San Diego, where I'm based now, to take over the CEO role of that organization. So I led that team through to approval of the first new mechanism of action treatment for gout in over 50 years that we achieved back in 2015. Personally, gout is very important to me. My father suffered from gout. I did not know that while he was alive. I only found out after he was dead. And I think we'll get on to talk about what people think about gout, and there is quite a big stigma around it. And I think, I have a personal experience of that with my father never ever talking and sort of suffering in silence. So it's been a passion of mine and my team to really try and help these gout patients, which is why we've actually come back into this space with Crystalys Therapeutics.
Thank you so much for sharing that, James. Now, as you mentioned, many people might not really understand what gout is about. So, to give listeners a clearer picture of the condition itself, gout is commonly associated with rich food, alcohol, or pain in the big toe. What is actually happening inside the body during gout, and what does that familiar picture leave out?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. So gout, honestly, is one of the most misunderstood diseases that exists. As you said, people believe that it's caused by diet, and that the only symptom is a big swollen red toe. Could be further from the truth, to be honest. So gout is caused by excess uric acid in the body. And that can be caused by one of two things. It can be caused by overproduction of uric acid in the body, and that's related to diet. So if somebody, as you said, has a high purine meal, so shrimp, steak, beer, then the body is going to produce more uric acid, and that can contribute to somebody developing gout. But the main reason that people develop gout, and this applies to over 85% of the people who have gout, are what we call under-excretors. So they basically can't excrete enough uric acid in the urine. So it's a dysfunction of the kidney that prevents them from excreting enough uric acid, and therefore the uric acid builds up in the body. The other thing that people don't understand about gout is that they think that the disease is the acute flare. So you talked about the big red toe. That's called a gout flare. And it's a sudden, intense attack of pain and inflammation, and you get redness in the joint. And that normally lasts for 10 to 14 days. And then the symptoms appear to go away. But what people don't realize is that the underlying cause of the disease is uric acid crystal buildup in the body. So the uric acid crystals are deposited in the joints, or indeed throughout the body in the cardiovascular system in the kidneys, and they cause inflammation. And what happens is when somebody actually has a gout flare, that inflammation just gets worse and is very localized in one point. But all the time, these patients have got uric acid buildup, and it's causing damage and inflammation to the body. Maybe for your listeners, one of the best ways to analogy here is cholesterol. People understand cholesterol, right? They know if it's high cholesterol, it's going to deposit in the cardiovascular system. It's ultimately going to cause a heart attack. And people take statins to treat that. They don't have any symptoms at all. People walking about with high cholesterol levels, the only time that they know the disease is when someone has a heart attack. In this case, it's similar to that in that people are walking about with elevated uric acid levels. They don't realize the uric acid's being deposited throughout the body until they have the acute gout flare. So it's one of these diseases where it's a sporadic symptomatic disease, but the disease is there all the time and it's causing damage in the body.
Thank you so much for explaining that. It really speaks to how complex it is, way more complex than it appears. So a gout attack can happen suddenly, as you also mentioned, but the disease develops over time. So from a research perspective, what is the most important thing to understand about what happens before, during, and between flares?
Yeah, I think it's about understanding, as we just talked about, that people that have gout that is uncontrolled, they basically have excess uric acid being deposited in the body all the time. And honestly, this can, for gout patients, can go on for months, years, even decades sometimes, so that they build up a really large reservoir of uric acid in the body that's causing low-grade inflammation throughout the body really all the time. And when what we're trying to do, obviously, in order to treat gout, you have to try and lower the uric acid level. Standard of care today is a drug called allopurinol. That's a xanthine oxidase inhibitor. It actually reduces the production of uric acid, so it deals with the diet side of the disease. The molecule that we're developing actually blocks what a transporter in the kidney called URAT1 that's responsible for reabsorbing uric acid. So basically, our drug makes people, pee out more uric acid in their urine. So reducing uric acid is critical. But what's really important for these patients, and what's never really been done before, which is what we're trying to do, is to show that our medicine can actually not only reduce uric acid levels, but if taken chronically, can actually reduce the number of flares or maybe even eliminate the flares, and can also reduce what are called tophi. So if someone has gout for a long period of time, the crystals start to build up on the joints, and they form masses of uric acid called tophi that are very painful, very disfiguring. And our drug, as well as trying to reduce uric acid and reduce the number of flares, we're also testing it to see if we can actually dissolve and resolve those tophi. So really trying to affect the clinical symptoms that these patients suffer from.
Thank you for that. Is there something that makes it difficult for some patients, some people, to continue treatment over time? And what is research showing about how adherence can be improved?
Yeah, again, a very, very good question, because gout is what we call a flaring condition. So, even people who know they have gout can be walking about, they have no symptoms that they can see until they have what's called an acute gout flare. And that contributes to the compliance issue that you just talked about. So, and there are two areas that I want to highlight here. So when someone's first diagnosed with gout, their physician will treat them with a urate lowering agent, normally allopurinol to begin with. So something to start lowering the uric acid level. And the physician tells the patient, you need to take this drug. This is going to make you better. The first thing that the drug does, because it's trying to lower the uric acid level, it actually mobilizes the uric acid pool in the body, and that actually results in the patient flaring. So the doctor's given you a medicine that he tells you that it's going to make you better, and the first thing that it does is make you worse. And so if that's not explained to patients, then a lot of patients actually stop taking the medicine, right? Because they think it's not actually helping them. So that's at the initiation phase. So it's really important that the physicians educate the patients that, you are likely to flare in the early months after treatment, but you need to keep taking this medicine and eventually it's going to make you better. The other side of that coin is that once the patient is better, so they've been taking the medicine for, a couple of years, they haven't had a flare. There's lots of examples of patients who at that point say, well, I'm cured now, right? I don't need to take this medicine anymore. They stop taking it. And what happens then is that the uric acid starts to build up in the body again. They don't immediately have a flare because the uric acid needs to build up until it gets to a certain level before they have a flare. But then maybe, another 12 months after they stop the medicine, they'll have a flare and the whole cycle is started again and they have to go on a urate lowering therapy to reduce the level. So there's very much a need for disease education, not only for the patients, but actually for physicians as well, because many physicians don't understand that cycle that the patients are going through and therefore don't advise them appropriately.
I see. And you spoke extensively to maintaining and reducing uric acid levels. So when we sometimes hear the term difficult to treat gout, who falls into that category and what can make it challenging for someone to reach and maintain an appropriate uric acid level?
Yeah, I think it really, first of all, depends, where does the patient start from when you're treating them? How high is their uric acid level? How much uric acid do they have deposited in the body? The term difficult to treat gout is normally applied to patients who are contraindicated or intolerant of the standard of care. So for example, patients who just can't take allopurinol, which is the standard of care, then physicians really don't have any other treatment options for those patients, and therefore they're described as difficult to treat. And often when we talk to rheumatologists, they'll say that they don't like to treat gout patients. And the reason they don't like to treat them is that they actually don't have very many medicines that they can actually use to treat them. The other patients that fall into that difficult to treat category are patients who have had this disease for maybe even a decade or more, and they have an extremely large amount of uric acid on the body. You and your viewers may well have seen pictures of people with like real large nodules, swellings on their hands or feet. These are called tophi, and these are just deposits of uric acid on the joints that have built up over years. And those patients are very difficult to treat as well because it takes a long time to obviously dissolve that uric acid and get it out of the body.
I see. I would like to talk a little bit about how researchers study all these different patient needs that you outlined in practice. So your current studies include both a large international phase 3 program and a smaller trial involving patients with fewer treatment options. So what has been most challenging about designing these studies for these different patient groups, and how have you approached those challenges?
Yeah, I think, one of the advantages that we have as a team is that, we've previously developed urate lowering therapies to treat gout at the previous company, Ardea Biosciences. And when we, created Crystalys Therapeutics, and acquired Ditinurad, the molecule that we're developing. We brought back together the team, the core element of the team that worked together at Ardea Biosciences. So we had a tremendous knowledge of the gout drug development and how to design studies. We had excellent relationships with the gout experts, the physicians that are experts in this field. And obviously, we had the learnings of developing the previous molecule that we got approval for. And always with, we learned from that experience, and we decided to design a program that not only looked at lowering uric acid, which is the regulatory approvable endpoint for the FDA or the European authorities, but we actually wanted to design a program that could actually show clinical symptom improvement. So that's what's really important for patients, right? They want to have fewer flares, and they don't want to have these disfiguring tophi on their joints. So we decided to design a program that would actually show improvements in those clinical symptoms. And as a result of that, we actually are conducting quite long phase 3 studies. So one of our phase 3 studies has a 15-month treatment period, and the other one has an 18-month treatment period. Normally, phase 3 trials are either 6 months or 12 months. But we specifically, based on our experience, decided that we wanted to really try and develop something that patients and physicians could see was actually going to control the symptoms or make the symptoms of the disease better.
So, in your experience, have you come across anything humbling or anything unexpected that changed how you thought about this disease, the patients, and in general, how the trials were designed?
I think, honestly, probably the two things that are most humbling are, one, how misunderstood this disease is, and how gout patients are made to feel like it's their fault that they have gout. And that's actually not the case. And, when we were working at the previous company, I remember one of my colleagues saying to me, he said, "I've had gout for years." He said, "I never talk about it." He said, "I don't even go to my physician to talk about it, because every time I go to the physician and I talk about it, he tells me, you need to stop eating shrimp, you need to stop drinking beer, you need to stop eating red meat." And he said, "I've been a vegetarian all my life and I don't drink alcohol." So, if you can see how the patients get frustrated that they are being blamed, that it's their fault that they have the disease, whereas in fact, actually, it's their body's inability to excrete enough uric acid that's actually causing the disease. And then linked to that, the second thing that I think is really humbling is how the level of care that these patients get is honestly terrible in some cases. The physicians don't pay attention to the disease. And remember, this is, as you said at the beginning, this is the most common form of inflammatory arthritis that exists. There are nearly 15 million patients in the US suffer from gout. So this is a very common and debilitating disease. And the level of treatment and focus that these patients get, honestly, is terrible. And part of that is because the physicians don't have many options to treat them, right? And these patients often have many other comorbid diseases. So they'll have a high blood pressure, they may have diabetes, other cardiovascular conditions. So the physician tends to treat those first. And then because they really have no other treatment options for gout, that tends to be left to the side. So our goal here is to try and really provide the physicians with something that can make a real difference to these gout patients. And then honestly, our role as well will be to empower these gout patients, in a sense, to demand better treatment. And if we can deliver something that allows both those things to happen, then we'll have done something really good for these gout patients.
Indeed, indeed. And I'm grateful that you're sharing stories from your experience. I think a lot of our listeners will relate to that in their own way. So I would like to look a little further ahead. So what trends are you seeing in how gout is being researched diagnosed or managed, and what changes do you think could have the greatest impact?
Yeah, I think the development of what we call URAT1 inhibitors, which is the type of medicine that our drug that we're testing is, I think that's going to have the biggest impact on gout because it directly impacts the root cause of the disease. And, if we're successful here, I think this is going to be a real game changer in terms of the way that gout patients are treated. There are other treatments under development. There is a treatment that's on the market already called Crystalys, which is a uricase. So it's basically an enzyme that eats uric acid away. It's a very effective medicine, but it's only used in about 6,000 patients a year because it's a very expensive multi-hour IV infusion to be effective. And many of the patients also develop anti-drug antibodies, which means they can't continue taking the drug. There are a number of companies developing alternative uricases that if they can overcome some of the challenges of Crystalys, then those may well be successful for the most severe gout patients. And then the third area of development is really treatment of the acute gout flare. Today, that's treated with anti-inflammatory medicines, mainly colchicine. Those medicines are somewhat difficult to tolerate because a lot of intestinal disturbance for the patients. And there are a number of alternative acute treatments for gout flare being developed that may well provide the physicians with additional tools that they can actually use to treat these patients. But I think the main area is the one that we're focused on, which is the development of these URAT1 inhibitors that focus on the root cause of the disease.
Wonderful. James, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. I really appreciate your insights on how misunderstood this disease is and all your insights on clinical trial design and patient needs.
Now, thank you very much for having me on, and I hope your listeners and viewers, they'll learn something about gout by listening to this, and hopefully they'll share it with other people and be part of the re-education process.
That brings us to the end of this episode of the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Visit xtalks.com to join the life science community and unlock exclusive access to editorial content, webinars, networking opportunities, and more. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers sharing them and should not be taken as professional advice, nor do they necessarily reflect the policies or positions of Honeycomb Worldwide. For more information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com.